everyone. Welcome back to the I'm with Amanda Medicare podcast. Today we are talking about nobody's favorite subject, Part D. Part D is the prescription drug component of Medicare. It's by far the most complicated and confusing. It's what I get most questions about. So if you're thinking, Part D, just know I'm right there with you. So Medicare Part D is actually all private insurance. Some people are surprised to know that. Starting in January of 2006, Part D plans were made available to Medicare beneficiaries to address and help with the costs associated with their prescription medications. I do want to note that Medicare Part B, so B medical, B like boy, is the part of Medicare that helps cover infusion therapies, medications that you receive inside of a doctor's office. So there is coverage for some medication treatments through Part B. But anything that you're going to get from your pharmacist, your mail order pharmacy, or a specialty pharmacy is almost certainly going to be under the Part D. So effective January 1st of 2006, these Part D plans came out, and they've changed a bit over the years. So I want to go through an update today of what Part D is, how you would compare Part D plans to figure out what one might be best for your specific needs. We're going to talk about the changes to Part D over the last few years and going forward because of the Inflation Reduction Act legislation. And I'm going to show you how to actually price a prescription drug list. So we're going to do that right through the Medicare.gov site live. So you'll see how we kind of arrive at the recommendations that we make for clients regarding their Part D insurance. So Part D doesn't always make the most common sense. It's not always straightforward, but hopefully after we finish the podcast today, you'll feel like you have a much better handle on Medicare Part D. So we'll just jump right into it. First is who can have Part D. So Medicare Part D is eligible for anyone who has Medicare Part A or Part B. So there's really only two ways that you can obtain prescription drug coverage. One would be through what's called standalone Part D, which is just a prescription drug plan. If you refer back to my Medicare A and B tutorial, and we talked about supplements and Part D and Medicare Advantage, Part D separate was that bottom piece on the left. So you could have a standalone Part D plan. You also could pick up Part D drug coverage through your Medicare Advantage plan. So the requirements for that are you have to live in the plan service area for either standalone or Medicare Advantage. With Medicare standalone, you could have a Medicare standalone Part D plan if you have Part A or Part B. To have prescription drug coverage through a Medicare Advantage plan, you have to have Medicare Part A and Part B. And you do have to live inside the service area for either of those plans. So just an overview of who's eligible. You have Part A or Part B, you live in the service area, and you enroll in the plan. I think the best place to start when we look at Part D coverage is the different components of a Part D plan. So what types of costs might I run into? How do I know what they're going to be? So let's start with some vocabulary. So Medicare Part D, all plans are going to have a monthly premium, certainly on the standalone side. So that's the amount that you pay the insurance company every month just to be enrolled in that program. Just a reminder, if you're getting your prescription drug coverage through your Medicare Advantage plan, or that Part C component, there may not be a premium, and that's okay. In that case, you just have a zero cost Medicare Advantage plan that includes your prescription drug coverage. But for standalone Part D, you're going to see that they all have a monthly premium, and you'd pay that to the insurance company either by check, by an auto deduction from a bank account, or an auto deduction through Social Security. So monthly premium is the first cost. The next piece of cost with Part D would be the out-of-pockets once you have the coverage in force. So by far, the most confusing can be the deductible phase. Not all plans do have a Part D deductible, but many of them do. The deductible amount is what the insurance company would expect you to contribute to the cost of your medicines. So you're going to cover 100% of the cost of those medications if they're subject to the deductible until you've met that deductible for the year, and then you would move into your co-pays and co-insurances. Now, a couple of things that people don't always realize about Part D deductibles, they reset every January. So maybe, you just started the new year, kept the same plan as last year, and I've gone to the pharmacy and it seems like your costs have gone up a little bit, most likely that's because you're contending with the deductible. Not all medicines are subject to the deductible. So if you were to look at the coverage details, you usually would see that tier 1s, maybe tier 2s aren't subject to the deductible. But once you get into those higher cost medicines, tier 3s or 4s or 5s, that's when the deductible steps in. For 2025, the maximum deductible for a Part D plan is $590. So you'll see some of them are $0 all the way up to $590, but Medicare this year said Part D plans cannot charge more than $590 for the deductible phase. That number increases a little bit every year. The other thing I wanted to say about deductible is they're cumulative. It's cumulative. So it's not like if you have 2 or 3 different medications that would be subject to the deductible because of the tier that the prescription is in, that you have to pay that deductible on each prescription. It's really a running tally. And once you've reached that $590 for the year, then the deductible phase is done for the remainder of the year. At that point, you'd move into they call it initial coverage phase, where whatever medicine you're filling and whatever tier your prescription drug company has assigned to that medicine will tell you whether or not you owe a specific copay or whether you owe a coinsurance. So a coinsurance is a percentage of the retail cost. And before you enroll in any Part D plan, you really should price that, and you should look at it to see, okay, this medicine is a tier 1, so I'm not going to pay anything for it. Not subject to deductible, they're going to cover it. Maybe a tier 2 has a smaller copay. But tier 3s and tier 4s and tier 5s, especially this year, more so than years previously, you might see a coinsurance, which is a specific percentage, instead of that set level $47, $45 copay. That's one of the biggest changes I saw from last year, 2024, to now in 2025. So we have monthly premiums, we have a deductible, maybe not due on all medicines, but could be due on some, not to exceed $590 for the year. And then we have the co-pays or co-insurances, which is the amount that your pharmacist would ask you to pay for your medicine once they fill it and you go to pick it up. So one thing that I'm hoping this podcast can really help people with is identifying whether or not they're eligible for programs that would help them with out-of-pocket costs. When it comes to Part D, or the prescription component of Medicare, the help that's available to beneficiaries is provided through the federal government. It's called extra help or low income subsidy. Sometimes people say LIS. We try not to be jargony. So it's extra help or LIS, low income subsidy. Those are the same thing. People just sort of use whatever words they feel like. So sometimes it can be confusing. The extra help program through the federal government is based on income and asset limits. So it is a program that you'd have to apply for. It's a program that you qualify for if you're under specific income and asset limits. They reset a little bit every year. This year, they're based on 150% of the federal poverty level for income. So for an individual, I'm going to check my notes. For an individual, the income limit per month that you can have to be eligible for low-income subsidy is $1,976. So that would include Social Security, maybe a pension, any retirement distributions, but the individual limit is $1,976. For a married couple, the monthly income limit is $2,664. So if you're under those thresholds for income, the next step would be seeing if you reach or meet the asset limit thresholds. So for 2025, the amount of countable resources, and I would go to Medicare.gov and look and see what the countable resources are, but it would be any amounts that you have in a checking or savings account, CDs, retirement assets, things like that. Doesn't include your home or your car, but there is a published list right on Medicare.gov. So for 2025, as an individual, if you're under the income limit of $1,976 per month and your asset limits or your countable resources don't exceed $16,100, you should go to Social Security or SSA.gov and apply for extra help. It is going to help with premiums. It's going to help with deductibles. It's going to help with co-insurances. It is a super valuable program. For a married couple, the countable resource limit is $32,130. So again, if you think you're under those monthly income limits and you are under those asset limits or countable resource limits, please go to ssa.gov, apply for extra help low income subsidy. It can save you a tremendous amount of money on your prescription drug costs. So I highly recommend it. So one of the biggest impacts to the cost of your prescription medications is your plan or your Part D drug plan's formulary. So a formulary is a list of covered medications. So all the medicines that the plan will agree to cover for you and at which tier they put those medicines. So when we talked about copays and coinsurances before as your out-of-pocket costs, I mentioned that those are going to be dependent on what tier your formulary assigns to those medicines. I can tell you it changes from year to year. It's not always the most sensical thing. Something might be a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3 on one plan and something completely different on another. That's why the Part D component is so complicated, because there's no right answer that fits across the board for everybody. But a formulary is the plan's list of covered medicines. Anyone who offers Part D coverage, right, regulated by Center for Medicare Services, there are some requirements that they have to adhere to in order to be eligible to offer you prescription drug coverage as a Medicare beneficiary. But the way that they comprise their formulary, they look at Medicare's master formulary. So every single drug that Medicare and the FDA says is approved for use for the Medicare population. There's actually 146 different categories of medications. And a prescription drug plan is required to cover at least 2 medications in every one of those categories. So you might find that your specific medicine isn't one that your plan has chosen from the master formulary, but there's got to be an alternative or an equivalent. And if something like that isn't, a suitable switch for you, then there are always avenues that you could take to ask the plan to cover it, like a formulary exception, or consider a different plan once you can make changes so that all of your medicines are covered. So with Medicare Part D, the formulary is that list of medicines. It tells you exactly what your plan is going to charge for those specific medicines based on the tier that they've assigned it. So I spoke a little bit about the different out-of-pocket costs that you would run into when you have Part D coverage and you're filling medications. I just want to really clearly go through the 3 different phases of Part D. Used to be 4, luckily for us. The 1 phase is gone, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But there are 3 phases of Part D. So the first is that deductible phase. As I mentioned, up to $590 for the year. Some prescriptions may be subject to the deductible, some may not be. But the deductible phase is the amount that your plan asks you to cover out of pocket before they'll help with the cost of those medications. The second phase is the initial coverage phase. So this is where that formulary comes into play, right? What medicine am I filling? What tier is it assigned? That will dictate what your cost, either copay or coinsurance, will be for that medication. A Medicare Part D beneficiary is going to stay in that initial coverage phase until they reach the catastrophic phase. Catastrophic sounds like the worst, but it's actually the best, especially in 2025. So this year, if someone were to reach the catastrophic phase, they will pay $0 for the remainder of the year for any covered medicine. So that's not the way that it's been, and I'm going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and the changes that it's made to Part D. But now, once you're in your initial coverage phase, once you accumulate $2,000 max out of pocket, you would go into catastrophic phase and you wouldn't be responsible for paying any more for your prescriptions for the year. Sometimes it's necessary for beneficiaries to make changes during the year. So one thing that's nice is, let's say I start the year in a plan and I'm in it for 4 or 5 months and I accumulate maybe $1,200 or $1,300 of cost, and now I move to a new plan. That $1,300 of cost that I've already accumulated is going to follow me into my new plan. So it's not like if I have to change something because I've gotten a new medicine that's not covered, you're not resetting that $2,000 cap. This is a tremendous benefit for Part D members this year. One thing I would be remiss to not mention is if you have a prescription drug plan that does have a monthly premium, even if you reach your $2,000 cap for out-of-pocket costs, right now you're going to your pharmacy, they're giving you your medicines, they're not asking you for anything because you've reached that catastrophic phase, you still do have to pay your Part D premium. So the premium does not count in that $2,000 cap. It really is strictly out-of-pocket costs. I quickly want to review what the Inflation Reduction Act legislation how it's impacted Medicare Part D, both coverage designs, protections for beneficiaries. The Inflation Reduction Act was signed in August of 2022. We started to see some of those required changes implemented beginning January 1st of 2023. The first impact that it had on drug coverage was a requirement they call the insulin savings program, where now they were putting a cap of $35 that a member would be responsible to pay for insulin medications. Sometimes people take diabetic medicines that may be in an injection. If it's not an insulin, it's not necessarily covered by the insulin savings program. So that's an important factor. But as of 2023, no Medicare beneficiary would be expected to pay more than $35 for their insulin medications. And they also made it so that those insulin medications were not subject to the deductible anymore. So it's $35 from the beginning. That was a nice feature for our diabetic clients. They also expanded vaccination coverage in 2023. So 2023 was the first year that Part D vaccines, so the prescription drug vaccines like Shingrix, maybe a tetanus shot, hepatitis shots, those are required to be covered in full by Part D now. Vaccinations are a little bit funny because some of them are Part B covered medicines, like a flu shot, right? You get that at your doctor's office. Pneumococcal pneumonia, COVID vaccinations, those are under the B medical, but the vaccinations covered by Part D, and I listed them before, Shingrix, so the 2-part shingles vaccine, pneumonia, hepatitis B, those kind of things, those are now covered in full by Part D. So those are the two changes we saw for 2023, insulin savings program and the vaccination expansion. So that was great. 2024, we saw an elimination of copays in the catastrophic phase. So it used to be before 2024, there was never really a period in time where you'd be done paying completely for all medications. There was always still a little percentage, it used to be 5% that you'd pay in the coverage gap. Starting last year, 2024, the Inflation Reduction Act said if you reach catastrophic phase, you don't pay anymore. Last year, the threshold for that was $8,000 of out of pocket. So that was still a pretty considerable amount for Medicare beneficiaries to have to pay, but at least once they got there, they saw that they didn't owe anything else. So 2025 is a very big year for prescription drug coverage and the legislation impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act. The biggest news is that finally the coverage gap was eliminated. Amanda, coverage gap, sometimes called donut hole, why they would take something wonderful like a donut hole and make it confusing with your Part Ds, beyond me. But you know if you hit the coverage gap in the past. So this was a point in time throughout the year. You know, you've gotten through your deductible in the beginning of the year, you had your set copays, and then all of a sudden you went and filled your medicines and the cost went up. It used to be that when you got into the coverage gap, you'd pay 25% of the retail cost of those medicines. So instead of having that set predictable copay, you saw a spike. Let's not spend much more time on it because it's gone now, which is great. So the elimination of the coverage gap was a big deal for 2025. The second thing is the new requirement that Part D plans have to cap beneficiaries' out-of-pocket expenses at $2,000 for the year. I touched on this a little bit already, but anytime you pay a deductible, anytime you fill medications and you pay a copay or coinsurance or keeping track of that, no Medicare beneficiary can be expected to pay more than $2,000 in 2025 to fill their prescription medications. Last year was $8,000. Now it's down to $2,000. That's a pretty considerable savings for some of our Part D folks. So you don't have to worry about that cost going up later in the year. That's not going to happen anymore. The third big change for 2025, which is pretty confusing so far. It's never existed before. No one's ever really seen it work until this year because it didn't exist. And that is the Medicare Prescription Payment Program. So the Medicare Prescription Payment Program is a requirement by the Inflation Reduction Act legislation that mandates that Part D sponsors or your prescription drug plan, right, allows members to levelize their out-of-pocket costs throughout the year in a payment program rather than paying upfront at the pharmacy. Whether or not the Medicare prescription payment program would be helpful for you is really dependent on the specific medicines you take and what potential out-of-pocket costs you'd experience, especially in the beginning of the year when you're contending with that deductible. So every Part D plan has a little bit of a different procedure. I think everyone's kind of getting the hang of it, but how it's supposed to happen, you would go to fill your medicine and the pharmacist would say, do you know how much this is? Maybe $400, $500, $600, right? You tell the pharmacist that you're going to enroll in the prescription payment program. They give you the medicine, and then your prescription plan will take that cost and levelize it through monthly payment programs through a monthly payment for the remainder of the year. Again, this is new. I think everyone's kind of getting a feel for it, right? It's new for pharmacists. It's new for Part D plans. It's new for brokers, and it's certainly new for members. So if you are finding that you have a high deductible or copay or coinsurance for a prescription, and you'd rather levelize that through the year, just call your member services number and say, tell me more about this Medicare prescription payment program or M3P, the M3P program. Looking forward to 2026, the last really piece of the legislation that's going to have an impact on Part D coverage and beneficiaries is the Medicare's ability to negotiate drug prices. So they've already announced 10 medications that are being negotiated to reduce those prices for members, which is going to be great. I'm going to read them because I can't remember and memorize all of them, but the medicines that have already been negotiated through this new legislation that you'll see some pricing impact on in 2026 is Eliquis, Enbrel, Entresto, Farxiga, Fiasp or Novolog, Januvia, Jardiance, Imbruvica, Stelara, and Xarelto. It's estimated that these price negotiations, and you could Google it, it'll tell you exactly per the medicine, are going to save beneficiaries anywhere between 38 and 79%, depending on which of those medications that you take. So giving Medicare the ability to negotiate drug prices is really going to help bring down costs to members. So I'm excited to see that start next year. So we had the insulin savings program, we had the vaccination expansion, we had the elimination of the coverage gap, we had the $2,000 cap, we have the Medicare prescription payment program, and finally, we have that Medicare negotiation to try to bring down prices. So I do want this podcast to have some takeaway, like some action items that might really help impact costs for you. So I do just want to go through my Part D best practices, and hopefully you'll find that there's something in here that's going to help improve your prescription drug costs. The first thing, and this is very important, is that you review your Part D plan every year. We have that fall, it's called annual election period, AEP. Some people call it open enrollment. It's actually annual election period. That's from October 15th to December 7th, when you can evaluate what changes your plan has made to Part D, decide if it's still the right fit for you, or if you want to enroll in a different prescription drug plan for the coming year. So the reason that I recommend doing a very thorough review every year is because plan formularies do change every year. You know, maybe something's been a set copay, hasn't been subject to the deductible, but now they've moved it into a higher tier. You want to know that before it's a surprise. So changes to the plan formulary, changes to plan deductibles, those change every year. So that's a good thing to know. Also, whether your plan is going to give your medicines a copay or a coinsurance is good information. And I also think, sometimes someone will go to the pharmacy and they'll say, oh, this isn't covered by your plan. Either it's been taken off the formulary, or maybe now it has a pre-authorization requirement where it hasn't before. So until the plan gets that information from your doctor, they just won't cover it. Another thing to check as you review that coverage is whether or not any of your medicines will have special requirements. So there are things like pre-authorizations where even though the medicine's listed on the formulary, they ask for a pre-authorization from your doctor before they'll help cover the cost of that medicine. So pre-authorization requirements may be step therapy, where they would ask you to use a lower cost drug before they'll fill a brand name, or a quantity limit. So some medications do have a set limit called a quantity limit that they'll fill in a certain period of time. So if you are prescribed something that exceeds that quantity limit, that could be a, in front of my pharmacist issue that you weren't expecting. The last thing I would say about reviewing coverage annually is making sure that whatever pharmacy you use is still a preferred pharmacy for your prescription drug plan. So all prescription drug plans have a pharmacy network. They may have preferred and standard pharmacies, but if a pharmacy isn't contracted with your plan, you won't be able to fill medicines there. So I don't find that this becomes an issue very often, but still just good to know if they're changing their preferred network or something like that. You'd want to review that during your annual review period. My second best practice is encouraging you to become familiar with the Medicare.gov drug pricing tool. I'm going to show you how to use this. I'm going to build a fake drug list. I'm going to show you how you evaluate some of the costs, how you'd see if a medicine's going to have a deductible, and really how to read through that data so that you can make good decisions about your prescription drug coverage. Okay, so we're going to learn how to price a drug list on Medicare.gov. We do this a lot. It's probably most of our work, I would say. But you just go to Medicare.gov and you'll always see a smiley person or people here. You'll know that you reached the right site because it'll say it's the official website of the United States government. Don't go to Medicare.com. That's different. Medicare.gov, and it will bring you here. The way that we price drug lists is going to click on this health and drug plans, and then under find and compare, you'll see find health and drug plans. It's going to ask you first for your zip code. So remember before I said the plans that you're eligible to enroll in are based on living in the service area? The way that Medicare confirms that is by asking you to put in your zip code. I'll just do a Liverpool, New York zip code here. So whatever your zip code is, put that in, hit continue. Here it's going to ask you if you want to price drugs under a Medicare Advantage plan or a Medicare Part D standalone plan. Leave the Medigap alone. There are no Medigap plans that offer prescription drug coverage anymore. So that would be misleading. I will tell you as you get into the software, even if you select Medicare Advantage Part C, you would be able to quickly toggle back and forth between Medicare Advantage coverage for Part D and standalone Part D, and I'm going to show us how to do that. So I'm just going to pick Medicare Advantage for now, and I'm going to click Find Plans. This is where it's going to ask if you have any help, like extra help, right? We talked about low-income subsidy. If you're eligible for Medicaid, if you have Medicare Savings Program. And if you do, you'd pick whatever one is applicable to your scenario. For this, for this purpose, I'm just going to say I don't get help from these programs, and then I'm going to hit continue. And then it's going to ask me if I want to compare or put specific drug costs in so that I can compare plans. I'm going to say yes to that. And now I'm going to take the liberty of creating a, made up prescription drug list so that we can talk about how these pricings work. So I'm just going to pick a couple of rosuvastatin. So you start to type in a medicine, you'll see the drop down come up. We're going to add that drug. It's going to ask you to confirm the dosage. The one that pops up is the most common one for that, but just make sure that whatever dose you're doing matches the one that you're prescribed. And then it's going to ask you the quantity. So do you take 1 a day? Do you take 2 a day? It'll also let you price medications monthly, quarterly, every 6 months, or every 12 months. Most times, I would recommend that somebody prices it at a 30-day. So let's add rosuvastatin. Let's add allopurinol. That's a medicine that helps with gout. Comes up with 300 milligrams. We'll keep that. And then I do want to make sure that we added tier 3 drugs so that we can look at those deductible costs. So let's add Xarelto. And I'm not picking on it. It's just always a tier 3. And that's usually 1 a day. Okay. So if you have one medicine, if you have 20 medicines, you just build the list. You'll see that you create the specific drug lists. Then we'll say we're done adding drugs. And then it's going to let us pick specific pharmacies. So mail order would automatically change it to a 90-day supply. So you'll know if there's a cost savings by doing it that way. Otherwise, I'll just pick my good friend Wegmans here. I do find in my area, Wegmans is usually a preferred pharmacy, so that's a good place to start for comparison. And then what's going to happen is, if you see here, I'm going to block out the specific insurance company and plan names. They're not going to look the same everywhere, so it might be confusing. I also don't want it to seem like I'm recommending one specific plan over another. I'm certainly not doing that. This is for educational purposes. So we're going to block out the prescription plan names, but this tells me here that there are 37 different Medicare Advantage plans in my zip code that I could consider enrolling in. So when you look at this, you'll see that they list in order from the least expensive way to fill your medicines all the way up to the most expensive. What you'll see here under total drug cost is a couple of things. It's going to take into consideration your monthly premium, if your plan has one, the deductible, if it's applicable, and the costs, copays, or coinsurances to fill your prescriptions. And if you look at the list that Medicare.gov gives you, you'll see that as we scroll down this list, that this number will start to get bigger. For these purposes, and I would say look at them, take a look, get familiar with it. But this initial snapshot is going to give us some good information. So it's going to tell us this plan happens to be a 0 monthly premium. This is what my total drug cost would be. I can see that this plan has a $150 deductible. And then it does tell me about some other features of this plan, but we're focusing just on drug coverage for now. So I'm going to go to view drugs and their costs. And you're going to see, again, monthly premium. I'm going to go to drug coverage. I'm just going to scroll up. I can just confirm that my drug list is accurate before I go further, so that's good. And then it's going to tell me if the pharmacies that I've chosen are preferred or just a standard. And then it's going to give me an annual snapshot. So from the first day of the coming month, so right now, this would be showing, for the remainder of 2025. It's going to show me the annual cost per prescription. So I can see here that this rosuvastatin doesn't have any cost, right? That's a 0 copay medicine with this particular plan. The allopurinol is going to cost me about $80 over the course of the year. The Xarelto is going to be, whether I do 30 or 90 days, $556 or $449. But we can take a look at that specific information. So here, it's defaulting to March because that's the first day of the coming month. I know that this is going to air a little bit later, but this is telling me that the first time if I fill all 3 of my medicines, the pharmacist is going to ask me for about $186. After that, it's going to be about $50 a month, and that's what I'll pay level for the rest of the year. The reason that this first month prescription copay or cost out of pocket is higher is because of that one-time deductible. So this is a snapshot year to year or month to month for the course of the year. If I looked at 90-day supplies, I would actually save a little bit with this plan if I were to do 90-day fills instead of 30. But what it also tells me is the cost of that specific medication if I got it every month at Wegmans. So I see that the allopurinol has a $7.65 copay. I see that the rosuvastatin is 0. I also see that Xarelto, after I've met the deductible, is $42. So if I were to enroll in this plan and go to fill my medications, the first time I fill this, my Xarelto is going to be subject to deductible. So the pharmacist is going to ask me for $192, right? The $150 deductible plus a $42 copay. After that, I've met my deductible because this one's $150. I'll pay $42 a month for the Xarelto for the remainder of the year. If I were to do a mail order pharmacy, I would happen to save a little bit in this plan. I'm not going to get lost in that. The other thing that people don't often see is this additional drug coverage information. This is where we can look and see, okay, if I get a tier 1, a tier 2, a tier 3, a tier 4, a tier 5, what will my cost be for that, right, in the initial coverage phase, or all 0 once we get to catastrophic. But it also tells me what tier the medicine is assigned, if it requires a pre-authorization, right? So if there's a tier here, we know it's a covered medicine. It would tell us if it requires specific pre-authorization. Then it also lets me know if there's a step therapy or quantity limit requirement. So in this instance, they would fill 45, so 1.5 rosuvastatins a day for every 30-day period. If you look at that and you see a quantity limit, don't get nervous. Just click it open and look at the details. Most often, the amount you're prescribed doesn't exceed that limit. But if it does, that's something that you want to take into consideration. And then there was a Relto, they'll fill 1 a day. A lot of great information on here. Sometimes if the drug costs are close from plan to plan, we'll look at those specific details. So maybe it's about the same, but this one doesn't require pre-authorization, so it might just be easier. Those are all little nuances and factors that you'd want to take into account. But the Medicare.gov site, I'm sorry if this makes anybody dizzy, the Medicare.gov site is actually really helpful. There is a disclaimer that goes along with this. It says that drug costs aren't 100% accurate. So, right, plans submit all their data to Medicare, and Medicare creates this software that helps us price and get a good idea of what to expect, but it's not always 100% accurate. So I just wanted to make that disclaimer. I mentioned in the beginning that sometimes somebody might want to have Medicare Part D standalone, maybe paired with a supplement in original Medicare, rather than a Medicare Advantage plan. You can very easily, with the drug list and the pharmacy specifications that you've already put in, you can very easily go in and switch and see. So now it tells me that there are 12 prescription standalone plans that I could pick. And again, it's going to price all of those things. So the Medicare.gov site is a great source of information about specific drug costs, how different plans are going to cover your medicines. So I really would recommend that you play around in it just to get a little bit of familiarity with it. It's not scary. You can't do anything wrong. You're not enrolling in anything through there. So build your drug list. It's a fun learning activity. So give it a shot. My third best practice, so going back to my Part D to best practices, number 1 was review your plan annually. Number 2 was use the Medicare.gov software so that you can price your prescriptions and, really have some really good detailed information about what to expect for costs. My third best practice is to know when you can make changes to your Part D plan. So everyone has the option to make a change during the annual election period, which is every fall. You'd start your new plan the first day of the coming year, so January 1st. But there are times throughout the year that people can make changes to their plan under certain circumstances. So my next podcast subject is actually going to be a review of election periods, when you can use them, how they work, what changes you can make during specific times, when you can make changes so that if something were to change with my drug prescriptions, my needs, when can I address that change with my Part D coverage? So understanding your election periods is important, and we're going to cover election periods in our next podcast episode. The very last one, my very last best practices for Part D is to explore any of the cost savings programs. So remember, Part D is insurance, right? I think it's fair to say that by definition, insurance isn't always perfect. So we always want to optimize the coverage that we need for our prescriptions through our Part D program that we choose. But sometimes they're still going to be maybe more expensive than we need them to be. So I would take a look at Extra Help LIS, right? That low income subsidy. If you meet those income and asset limits that we talked about earlier, that's the best help for prescription drug costs. If you're over those thresholds, there's 2 other recommendations that I would make for you to potentially save money on your Part D costs. The first is exploring your state's pharmacy assistance program, if they have one. So I'm in New York, right here in sunny central New York. In New York, our state pharmacy assistance program is called EPIC. EPIC is a program that helps with prescription drug premiums sometimes. It doesn't help with deductibles, but it does help with coinsurance and copays based on income. There are eligibility thresholds. So if you're interested in Epic, I would just say New York State Epic, put it in Google, and it'll tell you the different ways that that program might help you. Not every state has them, but a lot of them do. So if you're in a different state, just Google does Tennessee have a prescription or a state pharmacy assistance program and explore it if you think it might help you. My last option to explore for helping save costs on prescription drugs would be a manufacturer patient assistance program. So a lot of times as people have commercial coverage, maybe through group insurance or something like that, people might say, oh, I have a $5 copay card, or I have a $20 copay card for this medicine. Most of those programs do not work with government insurance, which Part D is. So if you have that coupon and you move into Part D, that's probably not going to help you anymore. But most drug manufacturers do have what's called a patient assistance program, where based on income, they might provide that medication to you for free. So the way that I help members research that would be who manufactures XYZ medicine. Once I know that information, you can put in the name of the manufacturer, patient assistance program, and you'll start to see the eligibility requirements for that, which of their specific drugs they offer help with. So certainly optimize your Part D coverage. Make sure that the medicines that you need are covered. But if you're still finding that they're more expensive than you need them to be, you could explore the Extra Help program. You could explore a state pharmacy assistance program. And if all of that fails, check out to see if there's a manufacturer discount or patient assistance program for your particular medicine. I know that we covered a lot of information today. I told you right in the beginning that Part D is the most complicated part. It certainly is. Hopefully this has given you some tips and some information that can help you make more informed decisions about your Part D coverage. But again, we talked about how Inflation Reduction Act has affected costs. We talked about how to price a drug list using the Medicare.gov website. I highly recommend that you try that. Even if you don't take medicines, it could be fun. We talked about the Extra Help Low Income Subsidy Program and some other cost saving strategies. And we talked about the phases of Part D coverage. So deductibles, initial coverage, catastrophic phase. Again, I hope you learned something. I know it's a lot. I know it's kind of maybe more technical than some of my other ones, but that's what Part D is. So thank you for hanging in there with me. Our next topic is going to be about election periods. So when can I make changes to my plan if I need or want to? When should I reevaluate the coverage design to find out if what I have is the right option for the coming year? I think there's actually a lot more flexibility in when you can make changes to your Medicare coverage than most people realize. So I think a good deep dive on election periods is going to be helpful for our next episode. And also please remember to keep an eye out for our special guest episode fireside chats. So far, I think all the guests that we've had have been really helpful. I think they're giving great information. I don't want you to miss any of those. So like and subscribe. Thanks for listening to another episode of the I'm with Amanda Medicare podcast. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, please leave a review as that helps me reach more people that can benefit from this podcast's content. If you have questions or topics you want me to cover for a future episode, please email them to info@imwithamanda.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Like any good industry, we do have compliance requirements, so here's my disclosure. We are not a government agency. We are licensed insurance agents who discuss insurance programs such as Medicare Advantage, Medicare Supplements, and Medicare Part D prescription drug coverage. Any specific plan information I provide is limited to the plans I offer in your area. Please contact Medicare.gov or 1-800-MEDICARE to get information on all of your options. Thank you.